office smelled of old paper and older decisions. Rajesh Kumar sat behind his desk, the same desk his father had sat behind, and his grandfather before that. 42 years old, with silver threading through his black hair. He had spent the last 2 decades building Rajesh Kumar Enterprises into one of the most respected manufacturing companies in the region. But today, he was about to let it all go. His father, Vikram Kumar, now 73 and semi-retired, sat across from him with a gentle smile. They were waiting for the lawyer to finalize the documents that would transfer the company's majority shareholding to Rajesh. It was a tradition in their family. The patriarch passed the business to the eldest son when the time was right. Vikram had done well. The company had tripled in value under his leadership. Now it was Rajesh's turn. "You've done well, Beta," Vikram said, using the affectionate term for son. "I'm proud of you. The company is in good hands." Rajesh felt a swell of emotion. This moment represented everything he had worked for. His father's approval, the family legacy, the responsibility that came with greatness. The lawyer, Mr. Desai, was a meticulous man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and an obsession with proper documentation. He placed the papers before them, explaining each clause in a voice that seemed to strip away all emotion from this deeply personal transaction. "Once you sign here, Mr. Vikram, Rajesh will hold 70% of the company. You retain 20% as advisor shares, which is traditional, and provides you security for your retirement years. The remaining 10% goes to the Employees' Welfare Fund, as per your wishes." Vikram nodded and signed. Rajesh signed. The lawyer witnessed. With the stroke of a pen, the business that had taken 3 generations to build was now primarily Rajesh's responsibility. That was 3 years ago. Today, Rajesh Kumar sits alone in his company car, parked outside his own office building, unable to bring himself to go inside. His hands grip the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles have turned white. On the passenger seat lies a legal notice delivered just this morning. The words blur in his vision, but he knows them by heart now, having read them 100 times. Notice of removal from position due to demonstrated mental incompetence and inability to manage company affairs. The board of directors, upon recommendation from senior management and family members, has voted to remove you from your position as managing director, effective immediately. His father's name is at the bottom. The shock of it hasn't worn off. The humiliation is fresh, raw, like an open wound. 2 years ago, Rajesh had married Priya. She was beautiful, educated, and, or so he thought, kind. They had met at a charity event, and he had been smitten immediately. His first marriage, to his college sweetheart Neha, had ended after 15 years with an amicable separation. There were no children, no dramatic fights, just a gradual realization that they had grown into different people. It had been painful, but civil. With Priya, everything felt different. She was interested in his world, asked intelligent questions about the business, and seemed to genuinely care about his well-being. His friends warned him about rushing into a second marriage, but Rajesh was lonely. He wanted companionship again. He wanted to feel chosen. His father had been cautious but accepting. Priya was the daughter of a respected businessman, well-educated and well-mannered in public settings. Vikram gave his blessing, though Rajesh noticed he rarely smiled around her. His father was a perceptive man, but perhaps age was making him cynical, Rajesh had thought. Now, sitting in his car outside his own company, Rajesh understands that his father's caution had been the wisdom of experience. The changes had been gradual. That was the insidious part. If Priya had made a dramatic move immediately after their marriage, Rajesh might have seen it coming. But she was patient. She was strategic. She was brilliant. First came the casual observations. Priya would comment on decisions Rajesh made at work, always in a gentle, concerned tone. "Darling, I was at lunch with Mira yesterday. You know, the wife of the CFO. And she mentioned that the quarterly reports seemed unusual this year. Are you feeling all right? You usually catch these things immediately." Rajesh would dismiss it. Everyone had off quarters. The markets were volatile. But doubt would plant itself in his mind like a seed. Then came the dinner conversations. Priya had a way of steering every discussion toward his work. She would ask him about his day, and when he explained a business decision, she would ask increasingly pointed questions. "But why did you choose that supplier instead of the one your father always used? Did you research properly?" Sometimes when people are stressed, they make hasty decisions. She never accused him directly. She never stated that he was making mistakes. She simply asked questions that planted the seed of doubt. Was he making mistakes? Was his judgment clouded? Was he as sharp as he used to be? Rajesh began second-guessing himself. He would lie awake at night, reviewing decisions, wondering if he had made the right choices. The stress began to affect his sleep. When his sleep suffered, his concentration at work suffered. His concentration suffered. His decisions became more cautious, more hesitant. And the more hesitant he became, the more Priya's concerned observations seemed justified. It was a masterful psychological manipulation, and Rajesh was too close to it to see the pattern. Then came the more overt moves. Priya befriended the company's chief financial officer, Vikram Nair, no relation to Rajesh's father. She would invite him and his wife for dinners at their home. She would subtly steer conversations toward the company's finances. She praised Mr. Nair's competence, his intelligence, his steady hand. She compared him, by implication, to Rajesh. "Mr. Nair must have such a stressful job, managing all those numbers," she said once during dinner. "I don't know how he keeps it all straight. My poor Rajesh tries, but he often comes home looking absolutely exhausted. Sometimes I worry he's out of his depth." Mr. Nair, already ambitious and perhaps resentful that Rajesh, younger than him, held the top position, began to listen. More than listen, he began to agree. He began to validate Priya's concerns. Next, Priya targeted the board members. She attended company events, always by Rajesh's side, always observing. She learned their names, their wives' names, their children's names. She became friendly with their spouses. She would mention, in casual conversation, her concerns about Rajesh's recent behavior. "I'm probably just being paranoid," she would say with a worried laugh, "but Rajesh has been so forgetful lately. Yesterday, he couldn't remember that we had dinner plans. The day before, the emergency board meeting was called on a Tuesday morning. Rajesh arrived to find the conference room full. His father was there, looking older somehow and deeply sad. The CFO, Vikram Nair, was there with a thick folder in front of him. Several board members Rajesh had known for years were seated around the table, avoiding his gaze. "Rajesh," his father began, his voice heavy with something between sorrow and disappointment. "We need to talk about your fitness to lead this company." The words hit him like a physical blow. Rajesh looked around the room, confusion and panic rising in his chest. "What are you talking about? The company is running smoothly. Our Q3 numbers were solid." "They were anything but solid," Mr. Nair said coldly, opening his folder. "Look at these discrepancies, these financial irregularities, these decisions that make no business sense. And that's not even addressing the behavioral concerns that have been brought to our attention." "What behavioral concerns?" Rajesh's voice rose. "I don't know what you're talking about. If there are financial discrepancies, let's investigate them. Let's find out where they came from." But his father was was looking at him with such sadness, such pity, that Rajesh's protest died in his throat. "We have documented evidence of increasingly erratic behavior," Vikram said quietly. "Mood swings, memory lapses, poor judgment. We consulted with a psychologist, and based on these reports, we believe you may be experiencing early onset cognitive decline." A psychologist? I've never seen a psychologist. No, but these documented incidents paint a clear picture, his father continued, pushing a file across the table toward him. It was Priya's fabricated diary. Rajesh flipped through the pages, reading accusations that seemed to belong to someone else's life. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to cry. He wanted to stand up and shout that this was all lies, that someone had orchestrated this entire thing. But as he read, as he saw the dates, the specificity of the incidents, he found himself doubting his own memory. Had he really called a meeting at 3 a.m.? He couldn't remember, but maybe he had. Had he really mixed up client names? Maybe. He had been stressed. Maybe his memory was failing him. This was Priya's genius. By planting doubts before presenting the evidence, she had already compromised his ability to defend himself. Because now, even he was unsure of his own recollections. "I'm calling for a vote," Mr. Nair announced. "I move that we remove Rajesh Kumar from his position as managing director, effective immediately. He will retain his stock, but be stripped of operational authority. His father, Vikram Kumar, will resume temporary leadership until we can hire an external CEO." Seconded. Another board member said quickly. Others nodded. "No, wait," Rajesh said, his voice cracking. "You can't do this. This is wrong. These documents are lies. My wife, she..." But even as he said it, he heard how it sounded. Paranoid, defensive, unraveling. "Rajesh," his father said gently, "maybe you should see a doctor. A real one. Let's get you properly evaluated. We're not your enemies. We're trying to protect you and the company." The vote was unanimous. 17 years of building, of bleeding for this company, of making it his life's work, erased in minutes. Rajesh left the boardroom in a daze. He walked through the office corridors, where employees had once greeted him with respect. Now they looked away, embarrassed or pitying. He went to his office, his former office, and cleared out his personal items. A photo of his father from 30 years ago, both of them smiling at the company's first successful IPO. A gift from his first wife, a crystal paperweight she had bought during their honeymoon. He left the building and went to his car, where he sat for hours, unable to move, unable to think clearly. When he got home, Priya was waiting. She was sitting in the living room, a concerned expression on her face, as if she had known exactly how the day would unfold. "Oh, Rajesh," she said, standing up to embrace him. "I heard about the board meeting. I'm so sorry, but it's okay. It's better this way. You needed a break. The stress was too much." He looked at her then, and something in her face, a flash of satisfaction, quickly hidden, told him everything he needed to know. "This was you," he said quietly. "All of this. You did this." Priya's expression shifted. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and he saw the cold calculation underneath. Then she smiled, a smile that held no warmth, no love, no humanity. "I did do this," she said calmly. "And you made it so easy, Rajesh. You were so desperate for love, so eager to believe that someone could care about you. You were so willing to doubt yourself. All I had to do was plant seeds. You did the rest." Rajesh felt the ground tilt beneath him. "How many times have you done this?" "Enough times to know what works," she said, moving to the bar to pour herself a drink. "You were actually one of the easier ones. Some men put up more of a fight. For 3 weeks, Rajesh existed in a fog of despair. He didn't leave the house. He didn't call his father. He didn't contact the company. He did nothing but sit in his home, wondering how his entire life had unraveled so completely. His ex-wife, Neha, whom he had maintained a cordial relationship with, called him. Someone from the company had reached out to her, apparently, asking if she had noticed any concerning changes in Rajesh's behavior. Worried, she had driven to his house unannounced, finding him unshaven, in the same clothes for days, barely eating. She did what she had always done when Rajesh was in crisis. She took charge. "Tell me everything," she said, making him tea and sitting beside him on the sofa. So he did. He told her about Priya, about the manipulation, about the board meeting, about the moment he realized his entire life had been carefully orchestrated chaos. Neha listened with the patience of someone who had known him for 20 years. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We're going to fix this." She started by calling Mr. Desai, the lawyer who had handled Rajesh's transfer of company shares. Mr. Desai, upon hearing the situation, was immediately concerned. A trained legal mind, he saw the outline of elder fraud, though technically being manipulated out of your company, not your inheritance, was a different crime. The mechanisms were similar. "This requires investigation," Mr. Desai said, "but we need to be strategic. We can't just accuse her. We need evidence." He recommended they hire a private investigator, a woman named Anita Sharma, who specialized in fraud cases. Anita was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an ability to see patterns that others missed. "Tell me about your wife," Anita said when they first met. Rajesh told her everything. When he mentioned her real name might not be Priya, that he had only realized this after her confession, Anita's eyebrows rose. "Do you have a photo?" Rajesh pulled up their wedding pictures on his phone. Anita took a screenshot and sent it to someone. "Give me a week," she said. That week was the longest of Rajesh's life. He wanted to believe that there was a way out of this nightmare, but his faith in the world had been shattered. How had he been so blind? How had he let this happen? Neha stayed with him during that week. She made sure he ate. She encouraged him to see a therapist, a real one, not the fabricated psychological profile, to process the trauma of being deliberately deceived and manipulated. "This wasn't your fault," the therapist told him. "You're not stupid. You're not weak. You were targeted by someone who had perfected the art of manipulation. There is no shame in that." The words helped, but the shame remained. How would he face his father? How would he explain that his judgment had been so catastrophically wrong? When Anita called with news, her voice was grim. "I found her," she said. "Or rather, I found her other identities. Pratibha Malhotra, Priya Sharma, Ananya Desai, Kavya Nair. 4 different names, 4 different cities, 4 different men, all wealthy, all in business, all now removed from their companies due to documented mental incompetence." She sent Rajesh files containing detailed documentation, reports from private investigators hired by the other victims, profiles of men who had been targeted, patterns of manipulation identical to what had happened to him, financial transfers to offshore accounts, legal documents proving that each man had transferred substantial assets after being convinced of their own unfitness. How did she do this without getting caught? Rajesh asked, his voice hollow. Because none of her victims wanted to admit they had been duped, Anita explained. It's humiliating. It's devastating to one's ego. So they either disappeared quietly, or in some cases, they accepted the narrative that they had genuine mental health problems. One of them ended up in an actual psychiatric hospital because he convinced himself the diagnosis was real. Rajesh felt bile rise in his throat. This woman, This predator had destroyed multiple lives. But we have a chance, Anita continued, because you have support. You have your ex-wife willing to stand by you. You have a company where there are people who still believe in you. And you have me, and I have found her. I know who she is and what she's done. Mr. Desai was a meticulous man, and he was furious. When Anita presented her findings to him and Rajesh, he stood up and paced the office like a caged predator. This is not just fraud, he said. This is elder abuse. This is calculated conspiracy. This is industrial sabotage. We have multiple angles of attack here. He called an emergency meeting with his team of lawyers. They discussed strategy, liability, evidence, and approach. First, Mr. Desai said, we need to secure the original financial records and ensure she hasn't tampered with them further. Second, we need to get your father on our side. He's been manipulated too, but if we can prove that to him, he becomes a powerful ally. Third, we file for the investigation of the company records to identify the source of the discrepancies. What about Priya? Rajesh asked. What about criminal charges? We'll get to that, Mr. Desai said. But first, we focus on reclaiming your position and your reputation. We clear your name, and then we make sure she pays for what she's done. The plan began with an unusual approach. Instead of confronting Priya directly, they let her think she had succeeded. They allowed her to believe that Rajesh was broken, that the company was under control, that she had won. Meanwhile, Anita continued her investigation, digging deeper into Priya's financial records. She found the money. Millions of rupees transferred to accounts in Dubai, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. She found the forged documents. She found correspondence with the other victims, comparing notes and sharing techniques. She's not even particularly careful, Anita said with contempt. She just counted on people being too ashamed to fight back. She counted on the shame being stronger than the fight. 2 weeks after Rajesh's removal from the company, Vikram Kumar received an unexpected visitor. It was Anita Sharma. She came to his home with Rajesh and Mr. Desai. Vikram was wary at first, but when he saw the evidence, the photographs, the financial records, the documentation of Priya's previous victims, his expression shifted from skepticism to horror. My son tried to tell me, Vikram said quietly, and I didn't listen. I believed her instead of believing him. She's very good at what she does, Anita said, not unkindly. She's been perfecting her technique for years. But we have proof now, irrefutable proof. Vikram looked at Rajesh, and Rajesh saw tears in his father's eyes, tears of guilt, of regret, of love. Forgive me, Vikram said simply. There's nothing to forgive, Rajesh replied. She fooled all of us. That night, Vikram called an emergency board meeting. He presented the evidence that Mr. Desai and Anita had compiled. He showed the board members the documentation of Priya's fraud, the financial irregularities she had created, the manipulation she had orchestrated. The board members' faces shifted from skepticism to shock to anger. They had been used. The company's reputation had been used. Rajesh had been used. I move that we immediately reinstate Rajesh Kumar as managing director, Vikram said firmly, and I move that we initiate a full forensic investigation into the company's records and the conduct of anyone who may have facilitated this fraud. The vote was unanimous in the opposite direction this time. Priya was arrested the next morning at the airport. She had been trying to flee, to take her offshore millions and disappear, but Anita had anticipated this. She had coordinated with the authorities, who had been watching the airport. The charges were numerous: fraud, forgery, criminal conspiracy, financial embezzlement, elder abuse, and in one case, assault One of her previous victims had resisted, and she had struck him. The police discovered her true identity, her complete history of predation, and her network of accomplices. She had worked with corrupt officials, dishonest lawyers, and unscrupulous accountants to carry out her schemes. When the case went to court, it became a media sensation. The newspapers called her the predator, the con artist, the woman who stole lives. Rajesh was called to testify. In the witness box, he described the manipulation, the psychological tactics, the slow erosion of his confidence. He talked about how she had made him doubt himself, how she had isolated him, how she had used love as a weapon. "I loved her," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Or I thought I did. I loved who I thought she was. The person she presented to me was everything I wanted: intelligent, kind, interested in me, in my life. But that person didn't exist. That was a carefully constructed fiction designed to make me vulnerable to exploitation." The judge listened carefully. The evidence was overwhelming. The documentation was meticulous. The victims' testimonies were consistent. When the verdict came, Priya was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Her assets were frozen pending civil litigation from her victims. But the legal victory, while sweet, didn't repair the damage to Rajesh's life. He had lost 3 years to this woman. 3 years he would never get back. He had lost his marriage, his reputation, though it was being restored. And most painfully, he had learned a hard lesson about trust and human nature. The process of reclaiming his life and his company was slow and challenging. First, Rajesh had to address the company's damaged finances. The altered records had to be corrected. The erroneous decisions had to be undone. The team that had been convinced of his incompetence had to relearn that he was, in fact, competent. Vikram Kumar stepped back into a consulting role, working alongside his son to rebuild not just the financial health of the company, but also its culture. Together, they addressed employees who had been concerned about the company's direction. They explained what had happened, as much as could be explained without involving ongoing legal proceedings. Many employees were shocked. Some felt guilty for not seeing through the scheme. Others felt angry at having been caught in the middle of manipulation they didn't understand. Rajesh called an all-hands meeting and addressed the company directly. "I know that the past few months have been confusing and concerning," he said to the gathered staff. "You saw me removed from my position. You heard rumors about my mental health. Some of you may have wondered if the company was in trouble. I want to be transparent about what happened." He explained in general terms that he had been the victim of a deliberate, calculated scheme designed to manipulate him and the company. He explained that the evidence had come to light, that the person responsible had been held accountable, and that he was ready to lead the company forward. "I learned something important," he continued. "I learned that it's not weakness to be vulnerable. It's not foolishness to trust someone you love. What happened to me could happen to anyone. The person who did this was skilled at manipulation. She had done it before. She had studied her craft." He paused, looking out at the faces of his employees. "What I also learned is that I'm stronger than I thought. That I have people who believe in me. That truth eventually comes to light. And that the path forward, while hard, is possible." The company moved forward. Financial performance improved. New initiatives were launched. Rajesh, having gone through the crucible of doubt and emerged on the other side, was a different leader, more empathetic, more aware of manipulation, more committed to creating a culture where employees felt valued not just for what they produced, but for who they were. The hardest part wasn't professional. The hardest part was personal. so eager to believe Priya's story about his failings? Why had he so readily doubted himself? Why had he been so desperate for connection that he had overlooked the warning signs? With his therapist, he explored these questions. He discovered that his first marriage's failure had shaken his confidence more than he realized. He had internalized a narrative of not being good enough, of not being able to sustain a relationship, of being fundamentally flawed in some way. Priya had weaponized that insecurity. She had sensed his vulnerability and had exploited it ruthlessly. The question isn't why you were blind, his therapist told him. The question is, now that you see clearly, how do you rebuild? How do you trust yourself again? How do you let yourself be vulnerable without being reckless? Rajesh began the slow work of rebuilding his sense of self. He reconnected with friends he had neglected. He pursued hobbies he had abandoned. He allowed himself to grieve the relationship that had never really existed, and the version of himself that he had allowed to be diminished. His relationship with his father also had to be repaired. There was an awkwardness at first. The weight of Vikram's misplaced trust and Rajesh's hurt that his father had believed Priya over him. But on a Sunday afternoon, as they sat in the garden of their family home, Vikram finally said what needed to be said. "I failed you," he said simply. "When you needed me to believe in you, I didn't. I let her persuade me. I used my judgment on the situation, but not on the person giving me information. That was my failure." "You couldn't have known," Rajesh replied. "She was expertly deceptive." "Perhaps," Vikram said, "but a father should know his son. A father should trust his son's word against the word of a stranger, no matter how plausible that stranger seems. I did not do that, and I'm sorry." Rajesh embraced his father, and in that embrace, something between them began to heal. The civil suits brought by all 4 of Priya's victims proceeded through the courts. Together, they sought recovery of the assets she had stolen and damages for the harm she had caused. Priya's defense was minimal. She didn't deny the charges. She didn't offer elaborate excuses. In her own testimony, she was chillingly matter-of-fact about her crimes. "These men were easy targets," she said coldly. "They were lonely, insecure, desperate to be loved. All I did was reflect back to them what they wanted to see. If they were so easily manipulated, perhaps they deserved what they got." The judge was unmoved by this reasoning. The law, she explained in her judgment, protected people from predatory behavior even when those people had made themselves vulnerable to it. Priya was ordered to pay restitution to her victims. Most of her assets were recovered. She served every day of her 12-year sentence and was deported immediately afterward. For Rajesh, the verdict was vindication, but it didn't feel like victory. Winning a case against someone who had tried to destroy you doesn't erase the fact that they tried. It doesn't restore the time lost. It doesn't undo the damage to your sense of self and safety in the world. What it did do was allow him to close a chapter. It allowed him to say, definitively, that she was wrong, and that he had been right to fight back. A year after Priya's arrest, Rajesh received an unexpected letter. It was from one of her previous victims, a man named Arun Verma, who had been the first person she targeted. For nearly a decade, Arun had lived with the belief that he was genuinely mentally unfit, that his removal from his company was justified, that he was a failure. Learning the truth, that he had been deliberately and systematically destroyed by a predator, had been both liberating and devastating for him. He had written to Rajesh to express solidarity, but also to warn him about something. "The memory of what was done to us will stay with us forever," Arun wrote. "There will be moments when something will trigger the doubt, when you'll remember how easily you believed you were incompetent, how real the despair felt. times when you'll wonder if you can trust your own judgment again. This is normal. This is part of the healing. Don't let it convince you that you were actually weak. You weren't weak. You were targeted by evil, and evil is very, very good at what it does. Rajesh read the letter many times. He shared it with his therapist. He began to understand that his recovery would be ongoing, that there would be no magic moment when he was suddenly healed, but rather a gradual process of rebuilding his life and his sense of self on a stronger foundation. 2 years after the trial, Rajesh was invited to speak at a conference on elder fraud and financial abuse. He accepted, even though it terrified him. Standing in front of an audience of business leaders, lawyers, and social workers, he told his story. "I want to be clear," he said. "What happened to me is not unique. The mechanisms of financial and emotional manipulation are unfortunately common. Predators like Priya look for vulnerable people. They study them, they wait for the right moment, and then they strike. The most important thing I want to communicate today is this. If you recognize these patterns in your own life or in someone you care about, you are not alone, and there is a way out." He paused, taking a breath. "The second thing I want to say is that recovery is possible. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it's possible. And the third thing, perhaps the most important, is that you deserve to trust yourself again. No matter what has been done to you, no matter how thoroughly someone has tried to convince you that you are unfit, unworthy, or incompetent, those are lies. Your truth matters. Your perception matters. Your judgment matters." The audience listened in silence. When he finished, there was a moment of quiet and then thunderous applause. The road to healing extended beyond the courtroom and into Rajesh's personal relationships. With Neha, his ex-wife, he had to navigate a new reality. She had stood by him when he was broken, had believed in him when he doubted himself, and had been instrumental in uncovering the truth. But she was his ex-wife for a reason. Their romantic relationship had ended. What remained was something else, something harder to define, but perhaps more precious. "Thank you," he told her one evening, months after the trial, "for everything, for believing me, for not letting me fall into the despair, for fighting for me." Neha smiled gently. "That's what people who love each other do," she said, "whether they're married or not. I know you were in pain, and I couldn't just walk away from that. Some bonds don't break just because a marriage ends." "Could we ever?" Rajesh started to ask, then stopped. "No," Neha said gently but firmly. "We're better as we are now. We're friends. We're allies. We're people who care about each other but don't hurt each other anymore. That's enough. That's actually beautiful if you think about it." Rajesh realized she was right. In his desperation for connection, he had forgotten that not every relationship had to fit into a traditional mold. Not every love story had to end with happily ever after. Some stories ended with two people finding peace with each other in a different form. With Vikram, the relationship deepened. The crisis had forced them to be honest with each other in ways they might not have otherwise. Vikram shared with Rajesh the fears that had made him vulnerable to Priya's manipulation. Fear that he was becoming obsolete. Fear that his son might not need him anymore. Fear of aging and irrelevance. "I wanted to be needed," Vikram admitted. "When she made it seem like you were falling apart, part of me was almost relieved. It gave me a role again. It made me feel necessary. I needed you," Rajesh said. "I needed you to believe me. I needed you to be strong. The fact that you weren't, it hurt. But now I understand that you were human, you were fallible, and that's okay." Together, they restructured the company's governance. Vikram remained as chairman, but with clear boundaries. Rajesh held the CEO position with actual authority to make decisions. They instituted new systems of oversight and transparency to ensure that such manipulation couldn't happen again. They also established a foundation, the Kumar Foundation, for elder protection and fraud prevention. They funded educational programs, supported victims of financial abuse, and worked with law enforcement to identify and prosecute predators. "We're turning our pain into purpose," Vikram said at the foundation's launch. "Every person we help, every predator we stop, every victim we support is a way of ensuring that what happened to my son doesn't happen to someone else." That's our legacy now, alongside the company. 3 years after Priya's arrest, Rajesh was invited to meet with a young man named Aditya. Aditya's father had recently been removed from his business, officially due to mental incompetence. Aditya had come across Rajesh's story online and had reached out, wondering if there were similarities. Rajesh agreed to meet him. When he listened to Aditya's story, the slowly eroding confidence of his father, the sudden emergence of evidence of mental unfitness, the wife who had positioned herself as the concerned caretaker, he recognized the pattern immediately. "It's happening again," Rajesh said quietly. "And this time, maybe we can stop it before it goes too far." Rajesh connected Aditya with Anita Sharma, the private investigator who had helped uncover Priya's crimes. Anita investigated and discovered that Aditya's father-in-law was indeed a con artist, though a different one than Priya. The pattern was the same, but the execution was slightly different. With evidence in hand, and with Rajesh's experience to guide them, Aditya and his father moved quickly. They consulted lawyers, secured the company records, and built an airtight case. When they went to the board and presented the evidence, they were believed because the pattern was now known, because someone had fought back before. The fraud was stopped. Aditya's father was restored to his position. The con artist was arrested. Sitting with Aditya and his father after the trial, Rajesh felt something shift inside him. His pain had been transformed into a tool that saved someone else from experiencing that same pain. It didn't erase what had happened to him, but it gave it meaning. "Thank you," Aditya's father said simply. "If we hadn't found your story, if we hadn't known what to look for, I would have spent the rest of my life believing I was unfit. I would have lived out my years thinking I had failed. You saved me from that." As Rajesh moved further from his trauma, he became interested in understanding Priya on a deeper level. He consulted with psychologists and criminologists about what motivated someone to become a predator, about the psychology of manipulation and abuse. He learned that Priya had been born into poverty in a slum outside Mumbai. Her father had abandoned the family when she was young. Her mother had worked as a maid, barely scraping by. Priya had been smart, beautiful, and desperate to escape her circumstances. She had started by seducing older men for money. Then she realized that with a little research and planning, she could extract far more. She developed her techniques through trial and error, and when she discovered what worked, she perfected it. She had written journals that were discovered by the police. In them, she described her targets as deserving of what happened to them, because they were greedy, because they wanted to feel young and loved again, because they were willing to use money to buy affection. She had convinced herself, a psychologist explained to Rajesh, that she was taking justice into her own hands, that these men, with their wealth and their privilege, deserved to be stripped of both. She had reversed the roles in her mind so completely that she was the victim and they were the villains. This understanding didn't excuse what Priya had done, but it made it more comprehensible. She wasn't a monster from mythology, born evil. She was a broken person who had chosen to break others in the process of trying to heal herself. The question, Rajesh said to his therapist, is whether I can forgive her. Not excuse her actions, but forgive her as a human being. Can you? His therapist asked. I don't know, Rajesh admitted. I think I can forgive the girl she was, the one who grew up desperate and afraid and saw predation as the only way to survive. But the woman she became, the one who did this deliberately, systematically, and without remorse, I'm not sure forgiveness is possible for that version of her. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's enough to understand without forgiving. 5 years after Priya's arrest, Rajesh sat in his office, his real office now, in the company he had fought so hard to reclaim, and reflected on the journey. The company was thriving. It had entered new markets, launched innovative products, and built a reputation not just for quality, but for integrity. Vikram, now in his late 70s, came in several times a week to consult, but he also spent time on the foundation, which had expanded to help hundreds of fraud victims. Rajesh had never remarried, though he had been on dates. He was cautious, but no longer paranoid. He had learned the difference between healthy skepticism and the kind of doubt that paralyzes. One afternoon, he received a letter from prison. It was from Priya. She had a few years left on her sentence. She wrote in clinical, detached language, describing her remorse, or what she claimed was remorse. It was unclear whether she was genuinely capable of remorse, or whether this was just another manipulation, another con. Rajesh read the letter once and filed it away. He didn't need to respond. He didn't need to engage with her anymore. She had taken enough of his time, his energy, his emotional resources. She didn't get any more. That night, he had dinner with Vikram, Neha, and Eleanor, the woman who had been dating Vikram for the past 2 years. They laughed about old times, discussed current events, and planned for the future. It was a chosen family, built not from obligation, but from genuine affection and respect. You know, Vikram said after a few drinks, I've been thinking about legacy lately. Not just the company, but what we leave behind. And I realize that my greatest legacy isn't Rajesh Kumar Enterprises. It's not the money, or the buildings, or the stock certificates. It's that I raised a son who, when faced with devastating betrayal, didn't give up, who fought for truth, who turned his pain into purpose. Rajesh felt tears in his eyes. I couldn't have done any of it without you, he said. Eventually, when it mattered. True, Vikram said with a slight smile, but you did it despite my failing you first. That's the part I'm proud of. The resilience, the refusal to accept a false narrative about yourself. That's all you. 7 years after the ordeal began, Rajesh received news that Priya had been released from prison. She had served her full sentence. She was deported back to her home country, where authorities were aware of her past and where she would face significant challenges in reintegrating into society. Rajesh felt a curious absence of emotion upon hearing this news. She had once occupied so much of his internal landscape, his nightmares, his anxieties, his doubts. Now she was just a fact of history. He thought about reaching out to the other victims to see how they were handling her release, but decided against it. Everyone had their own journey. Everyone had to find their own peace. Instead, he wrote a letter that he didn't send. He addressed it to Priya, and in it, he said everything he had never been able to say to her face. You tried to destroy me. You almost succeeded. You made me doubt my mind, my judgment, my worth as a human being. You stole years of my life and filled them with despair and confusion. You made me question reality itself. You turned my capacity for love, my weakness as you saw it, into a weapon against me. But here's what you didn't understand. I survived you. Not just just survived, but grew stronger. I learned things about myself that I wouldn't have learned in comfort. I built relationships deeper than any I had before because they were forged in crisis and maintained through honesty. I found purpose in preventing others from experiencing what you did to me. You failed to destroy me because you underestimated human resilience. You thought that if you could just make me doubt myself hard enough, long enough, I would collapse. You didn't account for the fact that other people believed in me. You didn't predict that I would fight. You didn't understand that the thing you were targeting, my vulnerability, my capacity for love, my desire for connection, is also the source of my strength. I don't forgive you. I don't think you're worthy of forgiveness. But I release you. I release the anger, the shame, the sense of violation. I release the need for you to understand what you did or to feel sorry for it. Your redemption or lack thereof is no longer my concern. You are no longer part of my story. You're a chapter I've read and moved past. That's the final victory, not over you, but over the hold you had on me. He never sent the letter. He didn't need to. The act of writing it, of articulating all the things he felt but had never been able to express, was enough. It was his private ceremony of closure. A decade after the initial betrayal, Rajesh was asked to write an article for a business magazine. The title was Betrayal and Resilience: How I Lost Everything and Found Myself. In the article, he reflected on what he had learned. There are certain betrayals that change you in ways that can't be undone. Someone you trusted turns that trust into a weapon. Someone you loved weaponizes your love against you. Someone you believed in reveals that everything was a calculated lie. These are profound violations of the human spirit. I spent years wondering what I should have seen, what I should have known, what I should have done differently. I spent years building narratives of my own stupidity. It took time to understand that I wasn't stupid. I was targeted. There's a difference. The first lesson I learned was about vulnerability. I had seen my capacity for love and trust as a weakness. Bria had certainly positioned it as such. But I came to understand that vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is courage. It's the ability to open your heart despite knowing that it can be broken. The alternative, to close yourself off completely, to never trust, never love, never hope, is a kind of death while you're still alive. The second lesson was about judgment. I had believed that I was a good judge of character, and my failure to see through Bria shattered that belief. I had to rebuild my confidence in my own perception. This took time, but I came to understand that predators are skilled precisely because they target our blind spots. Everyone has blind spots. Everyone is vulnerable to being fooled by someone who has studied the art of deception. The third lesson was about asking for help. I had been raised to be self-sufficient, to not burden others with my problems. When everything fell apart, my instinct was to retreat, to suffer in silence. It was only when I allowed Neha, my father, and later my lawyer and therapist, to come into the darkness with me that light began to return. The fourth lesson was about the nature of evil. I had to confront the reality that evil is sometimes not dramatic. It's not someone cackling in the shadows. Sometimes it's someone who smiles at you, who holds you, who tells you they love you, and who means none of it. This was perhaps the hardest lesson, because it means the world is less safe than we want to believe. But accepting this didn't make me paranoid or cynical. It made me more discerning, more careful, but not less loving. The fifth and final lesson was about meaning-making. I could not undo what happened to me. I could not erase those years. But I could choose what to do with that experience. I could let it destroy me, or I could let it transform me. I chose the latter. I used my pain as fuel for change, both in my own life and in the lives of others. Every person I help, every predator I help expose, every victim I support is a way of alchemizing that poison into antidote. The article was widely read. Rajesh received letters from people around the world who had experienced similar betrayals. Some wrote to thank him for helping them understand their own experiences. Others wrote to ask for advice, to ask how they could move forward. He responded to as many as he could, never offering easy answers, but always offering this: you are not alone. What happened was not your fault. Recovery is possible. Help is available. Keep going. On a warm evening in spring, Rajesh stood in the garden of his family home with his father. They were watching the sunset, a ritual they had developed over the years. They didn't always talk during these moments. Sometimes they just sat in companionable silence. "You know," Vikram said, "I've been thinking about something. When Priya first started her manipulation, there was a part of me, a small part, that wanted to believe her story, that you were falling apart. Because if you were, then I was still needed. I was still relevant. I was still the strong one. I know," Rajesh said gently. "It took losing my role as your protector to understand that my value doesn't come from being needed. It comes from simply being, from being present, from being willing to learn and grow and admit when I'm wrong." "That's wisdom," Rajesh said. "It's hard-won wisdom," Vikram replied. "I would have preferred to earn it some other way. But I suppose the universe doesn't give us that choice. It gives us the lessons we need, and we either learn them or we don't." They stood together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. "Do you think about her anymore?" Vikram asked. "About Priya?" "Sometimes," Rajesh said honestly, "not in the way I used to. Not with the same intensity. It's more like remembering a difficult chapter in a book. Important to the story, but not the story itself." "That's healthy," Vikram said. "That's what healing looks like." 17 years after the initial betrayal, Rajesh Kumar sat for an interview with a documentary filmmaker. The documentary was about financial fraud and elder abuse, and Rajesh's story was one of several featured. At 59 years old, Rajesh was graying but healthy, successful but grounded. The company had continued to prosper. The foundation had expanded internationally. He had built a life that was rich in meaning, if not in drama. "Do you ever regret not taking a different path?" the interviewer asked. "You could have disappeared into your money, built a quiet life away from the spotlight. Instead, you chose to expose everything, to fight back publicly. Do you regret that?" Rajesh considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. Yes, it would have been easier to retreat. But if I had done that, Priya would still be operating. Other predators like her would continue unchecked. Every person I help stop another predator is a ripple effect of my own suffering transformed into something meaningful." "Do you consider yourself a victim?" the interviewer continued. "I was a victim," Rajesh said, "of manipulation, of fraud, of betrayal. But I'm not that victim anymore. I'm someone who experienced victimization and lived to tell the tale. There's a difference. Being a victim is something that happened to you. Being someone who overcomes victimization is something you do. I chose to do it. What would you say to someone right now who is experiencing something similar? Someone who's been manipulated or defrauded by someone they loved?" Rajesh leaned forward, and his eyes held the intensity of someone who had stared into the abyss and chosen to look away. "I would say, what happened to you is not your Your trust was not naive. Your love was not weakness. You were targeted by someone who had studied the art of manipulation. That person's skill does not reflect your stupidity. It reflects their dedication to causing harm. I would say, it's okay to doubt yourself. It's okay to wonder if you're losing your mind. But reach out. Find someone you trust, truly trust, and tell them what's happening. Let them be your mirror. Often, when we're in the fog of manipulation, we can't see clearly. Other people can. I would say, there is a way out. It's not easy. It's not quick. But it's there. You will find it if you keep looking, if you keep fighting, if you don't give up on yourself the way the person who manipulated you tried to make you do. And finally, I would say, this will not destroy you unless you let it. You are stronger than you think. You are more resilient than you believe. You will rebuild. You will heal. You will transform this experience into wisdom and use that wisdom to help others. That's not just recovery. That's redemption. The camera captured the sunset behind him, the light casting long shadows across his face. A man who had been to the edge of the abyss and had returned, carrying the light with him. On the day of the documentary's release, Rajesh received a call from Vikram. His father's voice sounded weak over the phone. Rajesh's heart clenched immediately. "Beta," Vikram said, "I wanted you to know. I've been diagnosed. Cancer. Advanced. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months." Rajesh sat down heavily. His father had been the pillar, the rock, the thought of losing him. "I'm calling," Vikram continued, "because I wanted to tell you something before it's too late. I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you, not for the business, not for the foundation, but for the man you became despite everything, for the man you became because of everything. You took the worst thing that happened to you, and you transformed it into something that helps others. That's the highest calling. That's a life well lived." Rajesh cried as they talked. Not tears of sadness exactly, but tears of gratitude and acknowledgement. His father had not been perfect. He had failed Rajesh when Rajesh needed him most, but he had also taught Rajesh that perfection was impossible, that failure was survivable, and that the only real failure was not trying again. Vikram Kumar passed away 5 months later, surrounded by family and friends. At his funeral, hundreds of people came, employees of the company, beneficiaries of the foundation, people whose lives had been touched by his legacy. But what moved Rajesh most was that people came who had been helped by his father during moments of crisis, people who had been manipulated and then protected, people who had lost their way and then been guided back to themselves, people whose lives had been saved by the systems Vikram and Rajesh had built together. In his eulogy, Rajesh spoke about his father's journey from doubt to wisdom, from being manipulated to becoming a protector of others. "My father made mistakes," Rajesh said, his voice steady despite his grief. But his grace lay in his willingness to acknowledge those mistakes and then dedicate himself to preventing others from making similar ones. He took his guilt and transformed it into service. That's the lesson I want to leave you with today. Not that we are perfect, but that we can always become better. We can always serve. We can always help. And in helping others, we help ourselves heal.